Test 1, 2. Are we good? Good morning. It is good to see everybody this morning it's about time for us to get started. It is Sunday morning, December 17th. If you are checking this out at home or online, we are in our Sunday morning class where we've talked about the unseen realm. That's been what we call it. We've been talking about angels and spiritual beings and all manner of things that we don't really understand. And so when we left off last time, we were talking about the original rebel, the tempter, the serpent in the garden, and we know that where we left off, the serpent speaks to Eve, and she responds. We've postulated that this probably is not an actual reptile, that this is some form of spiritual being. Now, some people say, well, maybe the spiritual being inhabited the reptile. I'm not going to quibble with you on that. It doesn't matter. Either way, we know that the actual serpent is not the tempter. Snakes don't come around and talk to us and tempt us. It is where this is a divine being of some form. This is some form of spiritual being who is tempting Eve. And we left off talking about why the need to do this. Now, we're going to get into later on in other scriptures some more of that, so I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. But as we're looking at this, I think another clue that we're given to this being is in the curse. We read the curse as God cursing the serpent. You're going to crawl on your belly and you're going to eat dirt. I think let's look at it for real. Genesis 3:14. I'm reading from the New English translation, so you can tell me if yours is different. But the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all the wild beasts and all the living creatures of the field. On your belly you will crawl, and dust you will eat all the days of your life. And so some people say, well, there you go. Snakes before Eden had legs and could talk. Because the curse now they're told that he's going to crawl on his belly. Well, I don't totally buy that, because now we're making an argument from evolution, that somehow they had legs, and that doesn't make sense to me. But the flip side, if this is a spiritual being that is inhabiting the serpent, causing the serpent to do this, then why is God cursing the serpent? That's kind of like, if I do something and then somebody else gets penalized for it, that doesn't make sense. So what's going on here? Well, again, we're making some assumptions, we're making some hypotheses, some postulations, some theories. But if this is an angelic type being, a spiritual being, a Elohim, to use our word that we've used before, then he's cursing him in a poetic, metaphoric way here, that you're going down below everything else, right? All the beasts of the field and all living creatures. So this is in a Jewish mindset. What was below the ground? Sheol, the realm of the dead, the place where dead people went. Now, New Testament writers will later recategorize that and call it hell. But in an ancient Jewish mind, when you died, you went below the ground into Sheol, and then someday there would be a great day of resurrection when God would redeem people. And so keep that in mind. So you're going to be put down below everything else, and you're going to eat dirt. So it kind of, when we take it out of the animal kingdom and put it in the spiritual kingdom, we kind of see that as maybe a little bit more spiritual of a curse. Does that make sense? We're looking at this spiritual being, and we started last time talking about that perhaps, and again, the Bible does not say this, but perhaps this being was a seraphim, however you want to say it. But seraph is one of the words for snake, and so there's a serpentine aspect to that. We also know that the seraphim were guardian spirits, guardian angelic beings. Isaiah chapter 6, look at Isaiah chapter 6 verse 2 as Isaiah gets this vision of God's throne. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. Now, a Hebrew reader is going to hear the serpentine. The seraph is a snake-like creature. So we would call that some kind of dragon, right? That's kind of the terminology we would use. Some kind of serpentine creature with wings. That's kind of what we would use. But now remember, like we talked about, that the seraphim in Isaiah 6, the winged serpents that stand around or that guard God's throne, sound a lot like the 14th century BC Egyptian throne guardians of Tutankhamun. They were winged serpents that stood erect, wore crowns, and flanked the throne. And so now, then you get this, and people go, well, you're saying that Egyptian mythology influenced Jewish? No, I'm saying that before the Jews became slaves in Egypt, there's no record of these kind of creatures. There's no throne guardians of Pharaoh that were winged serpents. And so I'm saying it's the other way around. I don't think that the Egyptians influenced the Jews. I think the Jews influenced the Egyptians. And so once the Jews started bringing some of their ideas with them, then that influenced the Egyptian mythology, and there you go. Doesn't really matter. It's just trivia. Yes, sir, Gene. Right. Right. Yeah, and just because the Jewish scriptures are the story of God and God's relationship with humanity doesn't mean that God didn't have some kind of. I'm not saying there's multiple religions. I'm saying that there could also be other people who have some kind of vision of these spiritual beings. Does that make sense? And their mythology went a different way. That if you see some kind of manifestation of a spiritual being and you just make up your own story about it, maybe that's, I don't know. We're going down some rabbit trails and some maybes. But you're right. And Genesis 3, verse 24, we're back to the curse. We know that there are cherubim in the garden. Genesis 3:24, after he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. So once again, we know there's these other spiritual beings there. That's not like this is just the domain of God and other people can't go there. We know Ezekiel 28 is going to lend further support to that. If you want to, let's do that one too while we're at it. Ezekiel 28, verse 12 through 16, is also talking about the garden. And it's talking about, it's like we talked about before, as I'm taking off my glasses, the bifocal, some things are right here and some things are out there. You with me? This is talking to the king of Tyre, but he's also talking about something else entirely. Son of man, take up a lament concerning the king of Tyre and say to him, this is what the sovereign Lord said. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorns you. Carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald, topaz, onyx, and jasper, lapis lazuli, and turquoise and beryl. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. Through your widespread trade, you were filled with violence and you sinned, so I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings. So now we're getting some clues as to what this was in the garden, right? Because Ezekiel's giving us clues that, okay, this is more than a serpent. This is more than a talking snake. This is a spiritual being. This is some kind of exalted spiritual being, right? It's the guardian cherub gives you an idea that maybe it was some sort of post. Maybe he was supposed to be guarding the tree of life. Maybe he was supposed to be guarding the presence of the Lord. I don't know. Doesn't say that. But what do we get here if we're reading Ezekiel is comparing the king of Tyre to this spiritual being, because the king of Tyre is also setting himself up as amazing and beautiful and superior to everything else. And so Ezekiel is comparing him to this spiritual being that was in Eden. What do we learn here? What clues does this give us about what's going on here with this original rebel? He was pretty highly placed. This was not a junior league angel. This was some form of ranking spiritual being in some way. What else? The consequence aspect. Go ahead and tell me what you mean by that. Absolutely. If he is that highly placed and God's going to take him down to ashes, gives us something to think about, because we're not that highly placed yet. Jason? Okay. Jason's question is, it says his version says that you were seized with violence. So if you started out this created being that highly placed, how do you become filled with violence? Tim? He was not created evil. Absolutely. Yeah, that he was not created evil, that he made a choice to go this route. And, and we too have a choice to make. I think it comes back to what we were talking about last time about being imagers of God. Part of being made in the image of God means we have to have free will. You can't have love without free will. You can't love something if you're some kind of animatronic robot, right? There has to be a choice in there. You have to have. Does that make sense? And so and when you give, if you're God and you're giving your created beings free will by necessity means that they can choose not to do what you want them to do. Robin? Good point. Good point. And I think, and I don't want to put words in Gene's mouth, but I think we're talking about we're not considered spiritual beings, but I get what you're saying too. Obviously, we were worth the blood of Jesus, so we're pretty highly placed. Paul says we're going to judge angels one day. So yeah, both and I think is fair, because I don't feel like I'm going to put myself on the same level as an Elohim. However, obviously God does. So, Gene, you were okay. I just didn't. I'm putting words in your mouth over here. So, yes, Tim. Right, a little lower than the angels. Is what the Hebrew writer says, and he's referencing in Psalm when David says that, what is man that you're mindful of him? Jason. Okay, and that's a rabbit trail I'm definitely not going down. He said it makes you wonder why people would go ahead and invent artificial intelligence. I think it comes back to that, though. I think the imagers of God want to be like God. We want to create, and so there's something in that. Yeah. So, and there you go. Uh-huh. And I think that is taught, but I don't think Scripture actually supports that. I think they have enough free will that they can choose. I think most of them, and I'm once again, I think I'm making suppositions, but I mean, when you're confronted with the majesty of God and everything that God is, it's kind of a ridiculous choice. Why would you choose to do anything else? However, I think there's something in the ego that Ezekiel's talking about. That's why he's comparing this being to the king of Tyre, that even though you were created and you were given all this stuff, you somehow thought it was yours. It was your divine right. It was. Does that make sense? And so you're puffed up, because we're going to see more spiritual beings. This is only the first divine rebel. There's going to be more. There will be more who are going to choose not to do what God asks them to do, and kind of gets us all where we're going. I think the kicker that gives us the idea that this serpent, this angelic being, this divine rebel, it was something else, is Revelation 20. And Revelation 20 verse 2, he sees the serpent that ancient serpent who is the devil or Satan and bound him for 1,000 years. Um, and so we get, again, remember, devil and Satan by this time in the New Testament are proper names, but the actual words themselves are descriptions. Devil just means slanderer, someone who's a liar. Well, that's Satan. Satan is accuser, and it's like prosecutor. So this is a prosecutor who is also a liar. You with me so far? And so, but those are by Revelation 20 proper names. It's kind of like Mr. Baker may have started out making bread, but later on that's his name. That's an awful illustration, but you get my point. That devil and Satan, just like by this time angel is used in the New Testament to refer to all spiritual beings, it's really still just a job description. It really still is just a messenger. Does that make sense? And so these words, while naming a specific being, are also giving us clues into the identity or the nature of that being. Does that make sense? That he is a liar, that he is the accuser who is accusing the brethren night and day. So this is an ordinary. This is not an ordinary being. This is some kind of serpentine being, because he's called a serpent in more than a few places. We postulate that he may be a seraphim, and I'm skipping a bunch of stuff because it's unnecessary. We've already talked about it. The word seraph is having to do with snakes, but the word saraph with an A instead of an E, and that's weird because Hebrew doesn't have vowels, but I'm not going to explain that to you. But that word means to burn or to shine brightly. Now, once again, we're still seeing, because this original rebel is said to shine brightly. He's going to be called the morning, or not morning star. Yeah, but he's going to be talked about shining brightly in other places. And so that again gives credence to maybe this was a seraphim who, after a while, thought that somehow this glory was his and not God's, or I don't know. We're jumping into his head, so he's cast down to Sheol, which would have been below the dirt, and so this is being cast from light to darkness, from life to death, and so now, because of the sin of mankind, he is not. Oh, I'm sorry, Nick. Is your hand up? I'm totally missing you. Okay. Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. There's going to be consequences. Absolutely. Absolutely. When God tells us something, he's not making threats as much as he is telling us this is going to be the consequence. God doesn't say, if you eat of this fruit, I'm going to kill you. He doesn't say that. He says, if you eat of this fruit, you're going to die. Not, I'm going to kill you. There's a difference there. Because once you're removed from the tree of life, once you're removed from the presence of God, what is left? Well, death. I mean, you're going to die. There's nothing to give you that life, right? And so now you are removed from the presence of God and from the tree of life because of the consequences of your actions. And so now you're going to die. Now, it may be 120 years, but you're going to die. God doesn't say, I'm going to smite you immediately. This is not a threat, it's a consequence. And what I like what Nick's saying. There are consequences. God immediately sets about trying to rectify this, right? I mean, from Genesis on is the story of God trying to fix this and bring man back to this place of Eden where they're communing with God like he wanted them to in the beginning. But the consequences still remain. And because of their actions, because of the actions of this divine being, because of the actions of the human beings, those consequences still have to be dealt with. You know, it's still there. This being is cast down into the realm of death, and so takes it upon himself now that since he is the chief spiritual being now in the realm of death, Elohim is translated what in English? God. He sets himself up as the God of death. This is my realm. I'm here now. And so, you know, you've heard the old better to reign in hell than serve in heaven applied to this being. He goes down to death, sets himself up as the Lord of death. Well, now that again creates more problems because he is the Lord of death, so that means he lays claim to what? Everybody that's going to die. And so now he has set himself up as this adversary. This is not some kind of cosmic dualism where there are lines of belief that say, you know, God is this eternal good and Satan is this eternal evil and they're locked in this eternal conflict. No. Satan is a created being. He's set himself up as a God because he is challenging the rule of Yahweh. But, I mean, as we're going to see in other instances, he's a dog on a leash. I mean, he can growl and bark and do whatever he wants to, but God's still the one holding the leash, Larry. Eventually. We're heading that way, yes. And and you've heard me preach this here around Christmas. Revelation 12 is more about the birth of the Messiah and that dragon, again, still that ancient serpent, trying to because they don't know what's happening, right? These spiritual beings know that God's coming to earth. There's this Messiah coming for a reason, but, I mean, like Paul said, if they knew what was coming, if they knew what killing him would do, they wouldn't have killed him. But yeah, we're headed there. I'm just moving at my glacial, to use your word, pace. So the Hebrew word, there's a Hebrew word that means shining one. The Hebrew word nakash, which means snake, from this point on, always has to do now with sorcery or witchcraft. So now it's just not, once again, it's this double meaning. It's not just talking about snakes, and it's not saying all snakes are witches, but now the Hebrews will use the same word to talk about two different things because of their connection in this. So Isaiah 14 verse 4, you begin with a taunt against the king of Babylon. And this is an evil tyrant king whose pride, once again, is setting himself up as being this godlike creature. And Isaiah is going to reference Eden through this as well. Look with me at Isaiah 14, verse 4. You will taunt the king of Babylon with these words. Look how the oppressor has met his end. Hostility has ceased. Verse 14 now in here is going to introduce Lucifer in the King James Version. The Hebrew word translated Lucifer is Hallel ben Shakar, which literally means son of the dawn, shining one. The word Lucifer is taken from the Latin translation of the word Hallel, shining. So another bit of trivia, but Lucifer is not the name of Satan. Lucifer is the Latin word for shining. And for some reason, the translators just didn't translate it. They translated it to Latin, and then when they were translating the Latin to English, they just kept the Latin and used it as a name, capitalized it. Lucifer is just a Latin word that means shining. And so it has become now in Christian mythology the name of Satan, but it's really not. In the King James version of Isaiah 14:12, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? And really it reads something like, how are you fallen, O shining one, son of the morning? And so it doesn't really matter. It's still talking about the same being. The verse still means the same thing. It's just a little bit of trivia that Lucifer is not actually a proper name. Well, I got time. So I'm skipping on through some of this that we've already talked about because we're kind of being repetitive here, and we're gonna move on. Because we're getting into what's the actual crime of the serpent? What does he do that's wrong? What elicits this response? We've looked at a couple of references now throughout the Old Testament, a couple of references back to that crime, that sin, whatever word you want to use. What's his sin? What's his crime? What does he do wrong, Larry? He twists God's words, okay? Did God really say that you'd die? Did he really say that? Same thing he does with Jesus in the wilderness. Exact same temptation. Jason. He lied. And that's one of the things, that's why he's forever called devil, because that means slanderer, liar. And so... now, I'll put a little aside here and say when you decide to slander or gossip about your brother and sister in church, where do you think that's coming from? I'm just saying, Gene, and then Miss Pat. Absolutely. In twisting the words, he is setting himself up as above or equal to God so that the human would trust him rather than Yahweh. I'm just restating that because I think that's spot on. If you look at some of the other references, the Isaiah reference, the Ezekiel reference, that's what he's being accused of. You were all these things. You were this beautiful, wonderful creature, but somehow that wasn't enough for you, and you had to set yourself up as being above God or equal to God. He spoiled the innocence of the creation. It's a good point, because what was the point of the tree? Why couldn't they eat of the tree? Not just because God didn't say so, but I mean because God said not to, but because after it's they would know what? Right from wrong, good and evil. That they would have that knowledge, that understanding, that wisdom, whatever words you want to use there. And so, yeah, before that, if you don't know the difference between right and wrong, that's pretty much the definition of innocence, right? That they didn't know they were naked. There was no shame because they didn't know anything about anything, right? And so, yeah, he spoils the innocence of creation. I think that's a good point as well. Anybody else? What, Tim? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me get, Miss Norman's going to go before you. He's a betrayer, yeah, because God gives him this authority. Everything he had was given to him by God, and he betrayed it, he rejected it, he whatever, but because once again that ego, that I'm going to be this equal to God. Ooh. He became a stumbling block. He became the stumbling block, and caused them to stumble, caused the Adam and Eve to fail, to sin. And Jesus is going to say later, anybody who causes one of these little ones of mine to stumble, it'd be better for him if he'd never been born. I think that's one of the harshest things he ever says, as far as, it'd be better for you not to exist. That's pretty harsh, Larry. No, that's a good point. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm not restating that because I don't agree with it. I'm not restating that because it was well stated. But the point being, he's trying to set himself up as superior to God. He understands God better than God does even. He's going to understand the will of God better than God does even. And when we set ourselves up, or anyone else for that matter, if it's my beloved preacher, if it's my parents and grandparents, if it's whoever, and I say, well, I understand you're showing me what Scripture says, but this is what I was always taught. That's not godly. That's putting something else, saying this is more important than God. I understand what God meant better than God does. My preacher understood what God meant better than God does. Whatever, fill in the blank. I don't care who it is. I don't care what it is. If it's above God and the understanding of God, then it's in a place that it doesn't need to be. Miss Pat, you're chomping at the bit.
Well, I was just thinking, you're talking about setting someone up, a preacher or somebody, and I remember we were still in our 20s, Doug and I, and we were going to this church, and they had a very brilliant preacher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But I kind of caught some, because of his brilliance, I kind of caught some arrogance
Mm-hmm.
and some things he said, and I was talking to my best friend about it, and her conclusion was, well, if he says it, I believe it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she believed the preacher over the scripture that I was trying to show her.
And it's real easy to get there. I make the joke that when you stand out in the lobby and everybody comes and tells you how great you are every week, sooner or later you start to believe it. That's why, it goes back to you've heard me talk about my entourage theory, I'm sure. When you get people around you, I don't care whether you're Elvis or Michael Jackson or Mike Tyson or whoever, when you get people around you who never tell you that you're making bad decisions, that's when you show up with a face tattoo, because nobody told you that was stupid. And I once again, rabbit trail, but once again, that's why I believe that the system of leadership that we have, where there is an eldership and a preacher, it's not a pastor-led system. I think that sets you up for failure, because it puts one individual at a place with no accountability. I think there has to be some accountability. There has to be the preacher to be prophet to the elders and say, hey guys, why aren't we doing this? And I think there have to be elders to come to us and say, that's stupid. don't get a face tattoo or whatever. But you get my point. I think there has to be some accountability, and that's what this comes back to. I think as he stood there in the garden, did he sneak some of this for himself and get this knowledge of good and evil? I don't know. Was he a guardian of the throne? And so as all these praises are being sang to God, he kind of enjoyed that. And kind of said, well, I should get these praises sung to me too, because look how glorious I don't know. And I do know Isaiah 14 verse 13 that when he rejects God's authority, as Isaiah is making that comparison to this king of Babylon and talking about this individual at the same time, he says, I will ascend to heaven and set my throne above God's stars. Now remember, in our terminology, stars is usually the Elohim, the spiritual beings, the divine council, the whatever word you want to use there. I will preside on the mountains of God. That mountain of God, remember, that's the temple language. And so I'm going to preside, I'm going to set myself up above God's stars. I'm going to set myself up as the top of the top, and I'm going to be the one who sits on the throne in God's holy place. Well, there's only room for one on the throne, and it doesn't matter how beautiful you are, how splendorous you are. You can't do that. So, yes, go. Sorry, Larry. Obedient to the point of death. That Jesus was the exact opposite of this. That's part of the whole song that Paul sings in Philippians 2, right? That he was God, but he didn't consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, becoming obedient even to the point of death. Whereas then you have this being who sets himself up as even more than he is created to be, and is rebellious, betraying, usurping authority, whatever words you want to use there. Part of the curse then is, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. Now, I've always read this to mean that it's going to cause people to hate snakes, because I hate snakes. So that's always the way I've read this. But if I'm reading this now in a spiritual framework, who is the offspring of Eve? Not merely Cain and Abel, but when the Bible talks about the offspring of Adam, the offspring of Eve, who are, humanity, all mankind. So then, who is the offspring of the serpent? Who is the offspring of this being? Well, that's a little bit more abstract, right? We're not just talking about baby snakes. We're not just talking about more snakes. John 8:44, Jesus says to a group of religious leaders, you are of your father, the devil. Well, maybe that's a clue. John 6:70, Jesus calls Judas a devil. So maybe that's a clue. Okay, evil. But we use evil in a two-dimensional way, right? Evil is just this bad guy in the movie who's just bad for being bad, right? And so we would never be that. But it's not that simple, because I'm sure if you sat down this being, not that you would want to, but if you did, and he explained his motivation to you, it would sound very sensible. Does that make sense? I don't think it would be just, I'm going to get you. It's not that simple. It's and I can't put words into his mouth, nor do I want to, but there would be some kind of logic there where it would be thought out. Just like these religious leaders are not coming to Jesus accusing him because we're just bad guys. You know, there's a reason, but yet he calls them of your father, the devil. Tony? Right. If you go by Proverbs, the wise are those who are following the word of God, who are doing the will of God, whereas the foolish are the liars and the cheaters and the people like that, and they are the evil. Emily? There's always going to be a fight. Absolutely. There's always going to be a struggle. There's always going to be conflict. Tim, was your hand up? Uh-huh. That's what I think. I think it's both and. I think it's the Son of Man is used in Daniel to mean all mankind, and the Son of Man is used of Jesus to mean Jesus. Does that make sense? That yes, it's all humanity is going to have this enmity between their offspring and your offspring, but there will be one Son of Man who will crush your head once and for all. And even at the fall, God is saying, it's okay. I got this. You know, it's like last night, Olivia and Allie were baking, and they dropped some glass jar of vanilla or something, and it shattered everywhere, and they're all panicking. I'm like, it's not a big deal. We just clean it up. It's stuff breaks. It's not. I think God's like the same way. There's consequences now. We still got to clean up because we got vanilla all over the floor and glass shards everywhere. And if you walk across this in your bare feet, you're going to bleed. You know what I'm saying? There's still consequences, but God's not like, oh, I'm going to smite everybody now because y'all just messed up. I think God's like, I got a plan. We're going to clean it up, but there's going to be some stuff that goes between there and here. I mean, does that make sense? We're running out of time, y'all.
I like that cleaning up metaphor. I like it.
God's...
That he cleans up things.
From here on out, he's going to start cleaning. Well, it's going to get a lot worse from now until Genesis 11. Really, from Genesis 11 on, he's going to then go to Abraham and be like, okay, let's start this process. But anyway, we're going to get there anyway. Next week, there will be no specific Bible class in here. We will be in the fellowship hall. We're going to have breakfast. We're going to have children putting on some stuff for you. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a great way to start your Christmas Eve morning. But we won't be in here because I don't think we can talk about the devil on Christmas Eve. I can't do it. Although, Larry's right, we could do Revelation 12, but we won't. Then we'll come back next time, and next time we'll look at the next fall. We'll skip over Cain and Abel, even though Cain is called son of the evil one. But we'll move on to Genesis 6, because there's going to be another big fall of another bunch of spiritual beings that we don't really talk about a whole lot. But y'all remember in the 90s there was this movie called City of Angels? Anybody remember that? Nicolas Cage played an angel, and they all walked around wearing trench coats, and the angel, and my father-in-law used to love that movie. And he'd talk about it, and, oh, have you seen this movie? And I'm like, yeah, I saw it. That's pretty much the reason God flooded the world and killed everybody. So that's what we're going to talk about in Genesis 6. So that's 2 weeks, or no, maybe 3 weeks. I don't know if we'll do that on New Year's Eve or not. Hey, what a way to start the year. Take a few minutes, take care of your business, have some fellowship. We'll be back in here at 10 o'clock for worship. Thank you.